This is a paper by Kenneth Arrow, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1972. And this is what he published in Review of Economic Studies in 1962. The economic implications of learning by doing. It is by now incontrovertible that increases in per capita income cannot be explained simply by increases in the capital-labor ratio. Though doubtless no economist would never have denied the role of technological change in economic growth, its overwhelming importance relative to capital formation has perhaps only been fully realized with the important empirical studies of Abramovich and Solow. These results do not directly contradict the neoclassical view of the production function as an expression of technological knowledge. All that has to be added is the obvious fact that knowledge is growing in time. Nevertheless, a view of economic growth that depends so heavily on exogenous variable, let alone one so difficult to measure as the quantity of knowledge, is hardly intellectually satisfactory. From a quantitative, empirical point of view, we are left with time as an explanatory variable. Now, trend projections, however necessary they may be in practice, are basically confession of ignorance and, what is worse, from a practical point of view, are not policy variable. Further, the concept of knowledge which underlies the production function at any moment needs analysis. Knowledge has to be acquired. We are not surprised, as educators, that even students subject to the same educational experience have different bodies of knowledge, and we may therefore be prepared to grant, as has been shown empirically, that different countries at the same moment of time have different production function, even apart from differences in natural resource endowment. I would like to suggest here an endogenous theory of the changes in knowledge which underlie intertemporal and international shifts in production functions. The acquisition of knowledge is what is usually termed learning, and we might perhaps pick up some clues from the many psychologists who have studied this phenomenon. For a convenient survey, see Hilgard. I do not think that the picture of technical change is as vast and prolonged process of learning about the environment in which we operate is in any way a far-fetched analogy. Exactly the same phenomenon of improvement in performance over time is involved. Of course, psychologists are no more in agreement than economists, and there are sharp differences of opinion about the processes of learning. But one empirical generalization is so clear that all schools of thought must accept it, although they interpret it different fashions. Learning is the product of experience. Learning can only take place through the attempt to solve a problem, and therefore only takes place during activity. Even the Gestalt and other field theorists who stress the role of insight in the solution of problem have to assign a significant role to previous experiences in modifying the individual's perception. A second generalization that can be gleaned from many of the classical learning experiment is that learning associated with repetition of essentially the same problem is subject to sharply diminishing returns. There is an equilibrium response pattern for any given stimulus toward which the behavior of the learner tends with repetition to have steadily increasing performance, then implies that the stimulus situations must themselves be steadily evolving rather than merely repeating. The role of experience in increasing productivity has not gone unobserved, though the relation has yet to be absorbed into the main corpus of economic theory. It was early observed by aeronautical engineers, particularly T.P. Wright, that the number of labor hours expended in the production of an airplane body without engines, is a decreasing function of the total number of airframes of the same type previously produced. Indeed, the relation is remarkably precise. Produce the nth airframe of a given type, counting from the inception of production, the amount of labor required is proportional to n to the power of negative 1/3. This relation has become basic in the production and cost planning of the United States Air Force. For a full survey, see paper number 3 in reference, and Hirsch has shown the existence of the same type of learning curve or progress ratio, as it is variously termed, in the production of other machines, though the rate of learning is not the same as for airframes. Verdurn has applied the principle of the learning curve to national outputs. However, under the assumption that output is increasing exponentially, current output is proportional to cumulative output, and it is the former variable that he uses to explain labor productivity. The empirical fitting was reported in paper number 13. The estimated progress ratio for different European countries is about 0.5. Lundberg has given the name Horndal effect, a very similar phenomenon. The Horndal Iron Works in Sweden had no new investment and therefore presumably no significant change in its methods of production for a period of 15 years. Yet productivity, output per man hour, rose on average close to 2% per annum. We find again steadily increasing performance, which can only be imputed to learning from experience. I advance the hypothesis here that technical change in general can be ascribed to experience, that it is the very activity of production which gives rise to problems for which favorable responses are selected over time. The evidence so far cited, whether from psychological or from economic literature, is, of course, only suggestive. The aim of this paper is to formulate the hypothesis more precisely and draw from it a number of economic implications. These should enable the hypothesis and its consequence to be confronted more easily with empirical evidence. The model set forth will be very simplified in some other respects to make clearer the essential role of the major hypothesis. In particular, the possibility of capital labor substitution is ignored. The theorems about the economic world presented here differ from those in most standard economic theories. Profits are the result of technical change. In a free enterprise system, the rate of investment will be less than the optimum. Net investment and the stock of capital become subordinate concepts, with gross investment taking a leading role. In section 1, the basic assumptions of the model are set forth. In section 2, the implication for wage earners are deduced. In section 3, those for profits, the inducement to invest and the rate of interest. In section 4, the behavior of the entire system under steady growth with mutually consistent expectations is taken up. In section 5, the divergence between social and private return is studied in detail for a special case. Finally, in section 6, some limitations of the model and needs for further development are noted. The model. The first question is that of choosing the economic variable which represents experience. The economic examples given above suggest the possibility of using cumulative output, the total of output from the beginning of time, as an index of experience, but this does not seem entirely satisfactory. If the rate of output is constant, then the stimulus to learning presented would appear to be constant, and the learning that does take place is a gradual approach to equilibrium behavior. I therefore take instead cumulative gross investment, cumulative production of capital goods, as an index of experience. Each new machine produced and put into use is capable of changing the environment in which production takes place, so that learning is taking place with continually new stimuli. This, at least, makes plausible the possibility of continued learning in the sense here of a steady rate of growth in productivity. The second question is that of deciding where the learning enters the condition of production. I follow here the model of Solow and Johansen, in which technical change is completely embodied in new capital goods. At any moment of new time, the new capital goods incorporate all the knowledge then available, but once built, their productive efficiency cannot be altered by subsequent learning. To simplify the discussion, we shall assume that the production process associated with any given new capital good is characterized by fixed coefficients, so that a fixed amount of labor is used and a fixed amount of output obtained. Further, it will be assumed that new capital goods are better than old ones in the strong sense that if we compare a unit of capital goods produced at time t sub 1 with one produced at time t sub 2 greater than t sub 1, the first requires the cooperation of at least as much labor as the second and produces no more product. Under this assumption, a new capital good will always be used in preference to an older one. Going all the way down to the conclusion. We see over there some comments on the model. Many writers, such as Theodor Schultz, have stressed the improvement in the quality of labor force over time as a source of increased productivity. This interpretation can be incorporated in the present model by assuming that sigma, the rate of growth of the labor force, incorporates qualitative as well as quantitative increase. In this model, there is only one efficient capital labor ratio for a new investment at any moment of time. Most other models, on the contrary, have assumed that alternative capital labor ratios are possible both before the capital good is built and after. A still more plausible model is that of Johansen, according to which alternative capital labor ratios are open to the entrepreneur's choice at the time of investment, but are fixed once the investment is congealed into a capital good. In this model, as in those of Solow and Johansen, the learning takes place in effect only in the capital goods industry, No learning takes place in the use of capital good once built. Lundberg's Horndal effect suggests that this is not realistic. The model should be extended to include this possibility. It has been assumed here that learning takes place only as a byproduct of ordinary production. In fact, society has created institutions, education, and research whose purpose is to enable learning to take place more rapidly. Fuller model would take account of these additional variables. Thanks for listening.